Ready, Freddies? As we say in our house. So we're going to keep you all on time, keep us on time. This is the panel I want to hear. I want to hear them all. The politics of persuasion. At home, my politics of persuasion is I'm out of estrogen and I have a gun. So that's not really what we're talking about here. We're talking about media messaging. And as I think I previously explained, I'm sort of anachronistic on this. There's so many ways to message today in the technology, but I will say this as we're considering all these technologies. The essence of communicating and persuading is your message, and it's been ever thus since Cicero. So keep that in mind. It's not all your tools, it's what it is you're trying to say. You can have all the best tools in the world, but if you're not saying anything that is palatable to people, it's not going to break through. So I'm going to introduce Jonathan, who's Capehart, who's going to introduce his award-winning panel. He himself is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist. He's a member of the Washington Post editorial board. He writes about politics, social issues for the Post-Partisan blog. I love their blog. He's an MSNBC contributor. He's been on, you might have seen him, George, at our house, we call him George Snuffleupagus. I don't even forgot how to say his real name. Stephanopoulos, and so he's been Snuffleupagus since our kids were little. Jonathan was deputy editorial page editor for the New York Daily News from 2002 to 2004. He served on that paper's editorial board from 1993 to 2000. In 1999, his 16-month editorial campaign to save the famed Apollo Theater in Harlem earned him and the board the Pulitzer Prize for editorial writing. He left the Daily News in July 2000 to become national affairs columnist at Bloomberg News, took a leave from that position to serve as the policy advisor to Michael Bloomberg. So Jonathan's been on both sides of this, knows how to persuade, knows when he's being spun. We couldn't have a better moderator for this. And I'd also like to thank him retroactively for coming down and speaking at our the BGR here, which is our very important research, good government thing. Jonathan Capehart, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mary, for that very nice introduction and the hilarity with which you started the introduction about estrogen and a gun. Pity I can never use that.
Oh, you can.
Oh, stop, John. Stop, don't start. So gone are the days when the American people got their news from 3 broadcast networks and the Washington Post and/or the New York Times. Gone are the days when a lawn sign, door knocks, phone calls, and rallies were enough to persuade voters to vote for a particular candidate. In the ever-evolving world of social media, all the information a would-be voter would ever need, from writers fitting their own political or ideological bent, is just a click away. From Facebook, founded in 2004, YouTube, 2005, Twitter, 2006, BuzzFeed, 2006, and Politico, 2007. And as you can probably guess, the oldest one of these is just 8 years old. All the information a campaign would ever need about would-be voters and how to get them is also a click away. Actually, it's a bit more intricate and complicated than that. Just as an anecdote, I was at a party of a friend who was playing music on the Kenny Chesney channel on Pandora. And after one of his songs finished, an ad from Obama for America came on. And in addition, there was a prompt on the iPod screen to click to get more information about the Obama campaign. So this is a whole new world that we're in. And who better to explain it than our distinguished panel? Going in alphabetical order, and actually great order here, starting with Katie Harbath. She's a manager of policy at Facebook. Their full bios are in the program booklet, so I'm just giving you the top lines of who they are. Next to her, John Heilemann is the national affairs editor at New York Magazine, an MSNBC political analyst, and co-author of Game Change and the forthcoming Game Change Part 2. Margaret Hoover is a Republican consultant, CNN political contributor, and also an author. Her book is called American Individualism: How a New Generation of Conservatives Can Save the Republican Party. Adam Sharp is the head of government, news, and social innovation at Twitter. And last but not least, John Stanton is the Washington bureau chief of BuzzFeed. Welcome all. So I want to start with a provocative statement and get your reactions, and start with the two social types, Katie and Adam. So social media, particularly Facebook and Twitter and YouTube, contribute to our nation's deep partisan divide because they don't allow for context, reason, or thought.
We love the Washington Post too. I would somewhat disagree, not shockingly, I'm sure. But I think that we see on places like this, well, yes, it may start with just 140 characters or a picture on Facebook or a short call to action. It is actually an ongoing conversation that is happening on these platforms, and it's not something that just happens over an hour or over a day. It is all built up over time and over this election, and you do have certain things that are flashes in the pan, Big Bird, binders full of women, anything like that. But on Facebook, the election was, the topics about the election were 7 of the top 10 things talked about thus far in 2012. And so it was very much an ongoing conversation.
Adam?
Unsurprisingly, I would disagree with the statement also. I think that a lot of these trends that we've seen in polarization and partisanship have always been there, but that social media is now providing a fresh avenue to reflect what the public is talking about. If you go back to the early days of the Republic, most political issues got sorted out in the town square. But as the country grew and 300 million people, it no longer became convenient to be out in the square. We all went back into our homes. We started having these debates at the coffee shops, at our dining tables. And now it's being brought back into the town square. That platforms like Twitter and Facebook are bringing these conversations out of the coffee shops, out of the dining rooms, where now they're playing out in a public sphere again. And so I think those divisions have always been there, but now we are simply being exposed to more of those opinions than maybe we were a generation ago. And I think that's actually a positive step forward.
It's a rather loud public square. But Margaret, the moment I asked that question, I noticed your reaction was very visible. So how would you, what would be your response?
Part of the work that I've done in the last, or what I've focused on in the last year and a half or 2 years is the gap between youth and older voters in the Republican Party. And one of the things I've tried to work on is getting the Republican Party or working with the Republican Party to start bridging that divide. And I mean, the most thoughtful conversations are happening on Facebook pages around the country by people who are posting articles and writing opinions. And also, while you do have very contentious, mean, sort of polarizing, sort of hate speak in comment sections on websites, and we all get our fair share of them as soon as we post an article. You also get really thoughtful commentary, people who are engaged, people who are bringing up different sides of an angle that you hadn't thought of, and it is the reemergence of the public square and public debate. And it is also happening, in large part, this is a generational phenomenon that an older generation is beginning to come into, but that has begun with youth.
Mm-hmm. Do either of you? Go ahead, John.
Well, I mean, I think I would say that I actually sort of agree with you a little bit, but I don't think it's a bad thing necessarily. Like, people screaming at each other is sort of better than them not screaming at each other, you know? And if you look at Facebook, at least in my sort of anecdotal experience, the people that I've been friends with on Facebook for a long time, if you go back to 2008 or, the 10 election or 06 election, there wasn't a lot of political postings, really. I mean, there were a few people, but the people that didn't do politics for a living, you didn't see a lot of that. And now, especially this election, there was a lot. And a lot of it was sort of vitriolic and angry, and I had friends of mine that broke up because, they decided that they hated each other so much over politics. But, I think it's sort of a good thing. The one concern I have with it, though, is, these small, we've gotten to be so fast now. I'm not sure how much of it is starting to is sinking in to people's minds, and that's a concern I think we all have to sort of deal with. Is is it moving so fast that people are no longer able to actually come up with a real opinion about what they're talking about?
Well, I've got an opinion on that, but I will not share it. John, so share your thoughts on the provocative statement that Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, social media is contributing to the partisan divide.
Well, the part about thought, I think is wrong, like incapable of thought. I'm here to be the old grizzled man on this stage. So let me just
by
play
just
that.
a year.
Let me just play that part just for a second, and start by saying in 1996 when I covered the presidential campaign for a magazine called Wired and its online sister Hot Wired, we did the first digital native to the web journalism that anybody had ever done on presidential politics. So I say this as someone who's a fan of technology, a fan of social media, a huge consumer of it, a huge user of it. But if you think about the technological developments that have happened in media and where media and technology intersect in the time that I've covered presidential politics, 1988, satellites. Amazing that satellites and satellite targeting was really novel in 1988. 1992, cable news. 1996, the advent of the web. 2000, the real birth of the web as a political medium. 2004, the blogosphere. 2008, Facebook. 2012, Twitter. All of them have had big transformative effects on how presidential politics happens and the conversation that we have about it. All of them have had the same effect, though, as you've gone across. Increasingly, the general point of bringing the debate back into the public square is true. It's a little bit in error, though, because what it's done is it's created a lot of different public squares in which there are a lot of people who gather and congregate to talk to people who they agree with. So the problem of confirmation bias has become, and this goes to the ultimate start of your question, Jonathan. It's a social science phenomenon. We know that it's true. People are doing exactly what, again, to be historical and technological for a second, what Nicholas Negroponte first talked about, the daily me, as what would happen with media, that people would increasingly be able to put together, choose your own reality media, build a media sphere that they agreed with, that they heard things they liked, not things they didn't like, that didn't expose them to a lot of contrary opinions, but exposed them to opinions that made them feel better and made them feel as though they were right, and they put themselves in their own self-selected echo chambers. I just don't think there's any doubt that that's true, and if you combine that with what's happened in media that you and I are very familiar with on cable news, where, again, and I don't have a problem with any of this, it's just a reality. I'm not even being critical, it's just true. The left talks to the left, the right talks to the right. The amount of actual discourse that happens between the left and right is much, much less than it was when I started doing this. And I think the technology, the media developments, the stuff that's happened in social media, it's all contributed to that, whether you think it's a problem or a great, glorious thing. It's, I think, a real difference in how things are now in this sphere than they were over the course of the last 20 years.
And it would appear that Margaret has a problem with what you've been saying.
I don't have a problem with it. I think that was a really insightful way that you lined out.
However,
No.
we're also full of crap.
My friend, sir.
And certainly cocooning, I think, is the phrase that we use in media about this, people who go to one place to hear their own biases reinforced in the media and then sort of entrench themselves in their own positions. And I think absolutely that happens in cable news. And I think increasingly so it's happening, there are avenues for it to happen less and less in social media, especially the people who have really embraced and harnessed social media effectively, because by its very definition, it's interactive.
Mm-hmm. Well,
it's not one way, unless you want it to be one way.
Except that the people that you choose to be in your Twitter sphere are usually people pick their own, they're still choosing who they follow.
But yes, but not everybody picks to only hear that reinforcing cocooning effect, right? A lot of people also pick to hear and read people they disagree with and then engage them. So I guess it's a function of the participatory nature of the medium. So it's not one way, it's two way, which helps blunt that effect, I think.
Adam?
Well, I would just add two other very quick points. One is that I think in the social sphere, even if you do put yourself in that cocoon of people you already agree with, the odds of that getting permeated by opposing viewpoints are far greater than you're starting to see on cable news and a lot of newspapers, where there's one producer or one editor making the final decision of what's going to be on that broadcast. Whereas when you're looking at your Twitter feed, you're looking at a Facebook page, I follow 600 people on Twitter. that is now 600 different editors who are making the choice as to what I'm going to be consuming that day. And I think the likelihood of one of those 600, even if they were all people I thought agreed with me going in, introducing a new point of thought is higher than I may get from one of the cable news networks or a newspaper.
And that actually gets to my provocative question for the news guys here on the panel, and that is, how do journalists stay relevant in this age of social media when not only the public can leapfrog the media to get their own information, but candidates and legislators can leapfrog, well, the three of us, to go directly to the people they're trying to reach? How do we stay relevant?
I think it's we have to be going back to the quality of our content. I think, you know, for a while, the internet created this sort of phenomena where it was be first, and that was really all that mattered, and that created this sort of phenomena where basically people were just writing almost what people were saying to them. It was stenography. And if you were first and you were the guy that had that out there first, that's all anybody read. And that was sort of the metric. And it seems that it's starting to move back, because now everybody can just go get what the guy said. They don't need us to tell them that, you know, they put a statement out. What they need for us to do is to give them a context to it and to tell them why it matters, and sort of or why they're, you know, full of crap if they're being full of crap, or why they're, you know, being sort of interesting if they're being interesting. And I think it seems that that's starting to go back to that both sides are looking for people to do that. You know, they want to hear the people on their side, you know, yell, this is awesome, but they also want journalists to come in and give them a more honest assessment.
Say why it's awesome, or why it's terrible.
You know, yeah, how this fits into the broader context of what's going on.
So you think the hamster wheel, as I call it, the ever non-stop hamster wheel, actually now allows for us to have the time to take the 15, 20 minutes to take a step back and think about what's just happened before we write?
I think so. I think increasingly it is. I don't think it's back to where it was. I don't think it'll ever go back to the way it used to be, where, you know, you had a lot of time to really digest things and talk to a bunch of people. But it's moving back towards that, I feel like.
John?
You know, John, I think in terms of relevance, I think your model, you know, which is usually to attach a lot of photos of cat, like a lot of cat pictures or women with big breasts to your stories.
Yes, of course, because that's what I do.
Tends to drive a lot of traffic. And that'll keep coming back to your page all the time, Jonathan. You know,
Wow.
again,
Hey,
again,
welcome to Fight Club.
to be old and contextual, you know, every presidential campaign I've seen and every presidential administration I've ever covered, the goal of, hey, we've got this new technology and that'll allow us to get beyond the filter. You know, we'll be able to get past the Gang of 500. We'll figure out a way. Now these technologies are so democratizing. This will be the way. And they're always partially successful. And and there's no doubt that political actors have found various ways to go over the heads of or around the filter, the media filter, in a way that they're enabled in different ways every time. At the same time, you know, I experienced, and I know you did too, at the presidential debates this year when candidates and their staffs, when the two candidates and their staffs started to realize how important the Twitter conversation, not broadly in the country, although that was important, but secondarily within the Gang of 500, within the filter, within their room in the filing center, those 1,000 journalists talking to each other on Twitter about what they were seeing, as the campaign started to realize how important that was going to be in terms of shaping the internal psychology of the gang, and then therefore determining what the slant, what the take was going to be in broadcast news, cable news, and in print the next day, they started to make a much more aggressive effort to try to shape that discussion. But sometimes directly on Twitter, and sometimes through email, that they were lobbying people in real time because they knew that their tweets were going to influence their colleagues, and that was going to influence the whole shape of things. So that's just to say that there's using these technologies to get over the head and go around, and there's also the recognition that all these campaigns eventually capitulate to the new platforms and say, well, there still are influentials and decision makers, and there still are filters, even in those media, that determine what the larger broadcast media spectrum puts out, and we have to play in that and be aware of those technologies and platforms, and not just try to use them as tools to go over the head of mass media.
Go right ahead, Katie.
I think one of the big points that we're getting to, you know, your two questions kind of pitted us up against one another. And the biggest thing that I saw in this campaign, and where you see really successful campaigns, is this is all becoming integrated. whether it's journalists, social media, whether it's your get out the vote strategy, your fundraising strategy, your television strategy, whether you were a part of the media, you were using social media to ask questions of people and then put it online to get stories, to get sources. If you were the campaigns, you were doing the same things. You're coordinating your messages. You were doing that. And so we're starting to see less of these silos and more of how everything is now working kind of in conjunction with one another.
You agree with that, Adam?
I think so. When you look at campaigns, when you look at members of Congress, when you look at newsrooms, the ones that are most successful are not the ones who came in one day and said, oh, you're the youngest one, you're our social media editor now. They're the ones who have actually made it part of the DNA of the organization and recognize that. And we were at each of the 4 debates, and John was there too. We had a setup outside every debate hall where we had these live visuals where you could see in real time what moments in the debate people were responding to and what issues they were talking about, what candidate they were talking about. And so what you would normally be waiting for the post-game punditry to make the best guess of how the electorate was responding, you could see in real time. But very quickly, I do want to go back to one thing John said on the news front, that I think content quality is still the principal driver, because users now have far more choice. You are not restricted to just the TV stations and newspapers in your market to decide where you get your news from, because now the distribution model doesn't have to be the bottleneck to where you get your news from. So you look at the Penn State scandal, where the Harrisburg paper had a circulation of, I think, 50,000 readers before the scandal. When it broke, they were getting 7 million page views, unique users, every week, coming to that newspaper because that was the principal source for the country. And we've seen that again and again, and not just in news, in music, in movies. Once there was a very easy way of connecting to quality content, people were still willing to pay for it after everyone was worried, oh my God, people won't pay for music anymore.
Mm-hmm. So we have a few more minutes before we go to Q&A. After this is over, speaking of the debates and Twitter, I was thrown in Twitter jail during the middle debate, so we have to talk about that. Apparently, I tweeted way too much, and I was suspended. But until midnight, and then I was furloughed. But before we go to Q&A, Katie and Adam.
I think that actually had something to do with that personal revelation about Jack Dorsey that you put out there.
Moving right along. Katie and Adam, could you, in terms of their use of your respective platforms, give a grade to the Obama and Romney campaigns as to how they used your platforms to get their message out to voters? Katie, you start.
Sure. I'm going to skirt it a little bit, but
Come on.
But only because, I guess I would say I would give Obama an A and Romney a B minus, and I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
Obama really integrated our platform into his website. He really baked social into everything he was doing. So when you logged into Facebook and you were on one of his issue pages, and let's say it was about pro-choice, it showed you 4 friends at the bottom to share that with, and magically those 4 friends were probably female. And magically, they were probably from Wisconsin, Ohio, or Virginia. Every time you committed to vote, you made a phone call, anything you went on there, they were using their supporters to talk to their friends. And they saw that for every 5 shares, they got 1 action back. 20% return rate is pretty darn good. Now, the Romney campaign did a lot of advertising with us. They did a lot of really great page postings. They took a little bit of a different strategy and mainly focusing on their page, and they got a lot of activity on it. And there are a lot of Republicans and even older voters who are on Facebook and having those conversations. They just took 2 very different approaches. Obama's was very much more grassroots, and Romney's was very much more broadcast, using ads and just using a single page.
Yeah, I think Katie's on track in that there were different approaches, and it makes it almost hard to compare. If you look at just how they used the platform itself and how they tweeted, the Obama campaign, on average, was tweeting 20 or 30 times a day. The Romney campaign was tweeting maybe 2 or 3 times a day, but was being much more focused in that message, much more targeted in that message. And the Obama campaign had about 18 times as many followers as the Romney campaign. A 4-year head start, and being the incumbent president helped with that. But then when you looked at the actual engagement with those tweets, the people responding, retweeting, clicking through on links, you actually saw a picture that was a lot more even. When you looked at the volume of conversation about the two candidates, it was generally even in the last several months of the campaign, and at most of the debates, there was more conversation about the Republican ticket than the Democratic one during the debates. And so it's not necessarily clear that the more tweeting or the more followers translated into using Twitter better, just differently. Now, it could be argued when you look at the bigger equation that maybe that just hitting every single day part and every single type of user was able to connect the Obama campaign to undecided voters or voters that they hadn't caught earlier, and that with that much more targeted message, the Romney campaign was talking more and more to a base voter and not expanding it. But then I think you're getting into a broader strategic point that is not limited to just Twitter.
So Katie started her answer by saying she was going to skirt answering the question, but then answered the question by giving the Obama campaign an A and the Romney campaign a B minus. So you didn't skirt, but Adam, you did. So what's your so what's your score? Yeah. Oh no, I noticed. So give them. Come on, man, give them a score.
I think overall, I'd put them both in Bs, but I do give some extra credit for very precise moments on the Obama side. I give, as an example, a rally in Des Moines where the president, before taking stage, tweeted out, "Let's try this. After my remarks, I'll take your questions for 30 minutes. And then he went on Twitter right after and did. And you picture someone sitting, on a bus somewhere, going through their Twitter feed, and they see that the president's taking questions. They type out a question, they get an answer from the president, and then a few minutes later, they watch a YouTube video of the president reading their question, discussing it with staff, and then banging it out himself on a laptop, all in the arc of 30 minutes on their cell phone, maybe sitting on a bus, waiting in line at the supermarket. And I think for giving us a transformative moment like that fundamentally changes presidential politics and brings it back to the kind of retail politics you usually see in much lower ballot races, I think I have to give some extra credit points there.
We still have a few minutes left, and Margaret, I just want to ask you, does a candidate or a campaign's Facebook or Twitter strategy impress you, or is it just one of many things that you pay attention to or don't pay attention to? I mean, we're all talking about this now, but it could be one of those things where it's just you're not focused on how they're using social media.
No, everybody 30 and under is. Everybody 60 and over sort of knows about it, but I think is less attuned to how powerful it can be and how to leverage it. Let me give you an example. If you look at the rising stars in the Republican Party and how they're using Twitter, and then you look at Cory Booker and how he's using Twitter.
You mean Mayor Superman?
There is simply no comparison. I mean, Cory Booker has, yeah, it is, and you're right, it's not even about how many followers you have, although he has.
He's in the millions.
Yeah.
Okay, well, so that's one measurement, because Robbie Jindal and Chris Christie have 300,000 or 200,000. But it's very unidirectional still on the Republican side. It's, I'm going to a speech, tune in, or it's Veterans Day, thank you veterans. And all those are good, but they're them pontificating outward. And for Cory, you got a multiplicity of content. You get an inspirational quote he just read. You get I'm going to go shovel out the baby that's caught under the truck, and the hero is.
Here's the phone number for.
Yeah, but then you also get with him actually interacting with his constituents. So Jessica says, Mayor, we're doing this. What do you think? And he gives an opinion, and so it's the interactive. With the word engagement that Adam used, it's not just the unidirectional, it's how far the back and forth can go, and how that pulls more people in. And Republicans haven't figured that piece out yet.
As a whole, or is there
I haven't seen, and maybe I'm wrong, but I haven't seen a Republican
I would say
nailed it the way Cory has.
The Twitter conversation that John was talking about earlier with like the Gang of 500 or whatever you call all of the political reporters, I think Republicans are much, much better at manipulating that than Democrats are. during the debates, you saw that, I think, they were able to inject these sort of notions into the reporters' minds much easier than Democrats. I mean, a lot of times Democrats come across when they're targeting us as almost shrill and just sort of, you're an idiot. And whereas the Republicans were much more savvy about it, and even when they attacked you, they were more savvy about it until some of their sort of, more thuggish friends came in. But I mean, even then, you started to feel the pressure. And I think Republicans have long done a better job of dealing with the media in Washington, probably 20 years. But in this, you definitely see a distance between the two, I think.
Yeah, Adam?
Well, I just want to say one thing, following up on the conversation about Cory Booker and engagement. On the first panel this morning with the pollsters, we were talking about how one of the greatest signals is whether or not that candidate comes across as understanding you and your issues, whether they are in touch. And I think one thing that has been lost in politics over the last many years has been that basic sense of humanity. We build up these walls around the candidates, and it's those candidates that break through those walls. And yes, on Twitter, I can talk directly to Mayor Booker. I can talk directly to the president, and I know it's him. And I may not get an answer, but the fact that they are answering it does tear that down a little bit. And you see this from a few others. Claire McCaskill is famous for it. She tweeted, someone had tweeted once, "Oh my God, I just saw Senator McCaskill in the Walmart." And McCaskill wrote back, "I'm still in aisle 5, why don't you say hello?" And the reality is that only matters specifically to that one voter, but to everyone else. I mean, how many millions of dollars are spent every cycle showing candidates strolling through a field of wildflowers with their perfect family and the golden retriever?
Don't forget the hay bales.
And the hay bales, to get the basic humanity that she did in a single tweet.
But really, this is like just to be. I like to be a glass of cold water on this whole thing. Like, Cory Booker is amazing, and the other Cory Booker is who? Like, there are how many Cory Bookers who do what he does? I follow a lot of politicians. I don't know anybody else who does what Cory Booker does on Twitter. Claire McCaskill does some tweets. The president doesn't respond to your tweets except for some very minimal moments. We have a situation where right now, and I think this is a huge problem. This has nothing to do with social media, by the way, not a diss on social media, but just to say, right now, the candidates who run for president, Congress, Senate, gubernatorial campaigns have decided that they have to have less engagement with members of the press than at any time in any of our lifetimes, certainly in anybody in our careers. It is a massive problem. And so, when the day comes when there's active engagement between voters and a lot of candidates through these technologies, which are all possible, and I'll be like, that's awesome. Right now, though, let's not pretend the fact that there are 5 or 6 or 10 politicians who actively engage with their constituents on Twitter is in some way a sign of things getting better in terms of how exposed or engaged candidates are with voters. Right now, we're at the low ebb of candidates putting themselves out in front of, through what are, unfortunately at this moment, still the best representatives that voters have, which is taking questions from the press, having to have aggressive back and forth where they're open and accountable, having to answer questions from the press as representatives of the voting public. The candidates in both parties are less accessible than they have ever been, and we're at much more of, I think, a crisis in that area. Maybe someday, and I'm hopeful, that all these politicians will see that social media is good for them and in their interest, and we'll have more back and forth than we've ever had before. Right now, there's less back and forth than there's ever been before, even as these technologies are promising all kinds of things I find inspirational. At this moment right now, the biggest problem we have with respect to the media and politics is that both politicians have decided that they don't have to engage with the public through their representatives in the press at all.
And speaking of engaging with the public, a while ago I got the 5-minute warning for a Q&A, but there's a microphone right here in the center if anyone wants to ask a question. I'm not sure how much time we have for Q&A, but I strongly encourage you to actually have your Q be a question. And just forewarning, if
True false is best.
Right, if I sense that a speech is coming, I will cut you off. I don't mean to be rude, but I will be rude. So please, ask your question. Thank you, sir.
Is your speech finished?
Yes, it is.
Good, excellent, good. I have one observation on media. I think you covered the area of media concentration from a strategic and tactical point of view from campaigns. I think that's excellent. But the one point that bothers me most about social media is that it removes the Q&A aspect, the face-to-face, like you all are engaged with one another. Jim and Mary are married to one another. They have to sit across the table from one another. When you tweet somebody, you could be saying anything and antagonize them and not suffer the social interaction. So I would argue that what you're talking about is more isolation of individual voters when it comes to developing a consensus for politics.
What do you make of that?
I would slightly
Thank you.
disagree. We hear that a lot, that being online means that we're just kind of staying in our own cocoons and we're not having that FaceTime. I've actually found that things like Twitter and Facebook have helped me reconnect with friends in ways that I haven't before, and be in a city in New Orleans or New York where I can tweet that I'm there and a friend tells me, oh, they're just down the street, they're visiting too. And you're still able to have those back and forth conversations. Also find too that when candidates, when I was at the NRSC and we were having people tweet to the, very mean things or saying stuff, and if I would respond back, a lot of times having that human interaction, all of a sudden they realized that there was a human behind it.
That's so true.
And would calm down a little bit.
The meaner the letter, the more likely I am to respond. Next question.
My name is Jasmia. I'm a student at Tulane. And while watching Bill Maher, there was a comment made that we should demonize Fox News. And Essie Cupp, she made a comment that demonizing Fox News would be stifling free speech. So my question is, since Fox News is owned by a major corporation, just as many news outlets are, would they still fall under the protections of free speech or freedom of the press, or should they?
Yes, they do. That's how the First Amendment works.
Yeah, but should they still?
I think Essie Cupp's wrong in the sense that I think the free speech is the freedom to criticize anybody you want, and people want to criticize Fox News, they should, and people want to criticize MSNBC, they should. But
And they do.
in the freedom of speech works both ways,
Yeah.
Thank you.
My question is directed at Ms. Hoover, and I wondered how an individual like Meghan McCain, isn't being dishonest to voters when she tweets that you can be pro-marriage equality and be a Republican, when in fact, most of the times when you go to the poll and vote for the Republican, you're not voting for that.
I actually had a conversation with Megan about that question within the last week.
Tell us.
And she said she was getting criticisms from people. Maybe you've been interacting with her on social media. But she mentioned to me that she'd been getting criticisms on social media for people saying, how could she possibly be in favor of same-sex marriage and be a Republican? And she and I happen to agree on that position. We're both for same-sex marriage, and we're both Republicans. And what she and I are working for together, and just today she joined a group called Freedom to Marry, which is a national group which is working for marriage in all 50 states. She joined this group called Young Conservatives for Freedom to Marry, is that we're working within the Republican coalition to make sort of move the Republican Party in a direction that would make individual freedom consistent across all of our platforms and principles, including freedom to marry. And that this is entirely consistent with a party that's in favor of individual freedom. So I think Megan is not a hypocrite at all. I think she's courageous, and I think she's being a leader. And I think you would probably like the Republican Party that Meghan McCain has in mind.
Wow. Recruiting from the stage.
Drops the mic.
Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Brian, and I was just wondering, when you look at the polling of young people, a lot of us say that we get our news from comedy sources like the Colbert Report or the Daily Show. What do y'all think about that?
Okay, well, I'll say something to
Get the news people.
I'll rev the motor and then let the. I think Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert they're funny on their own. If you don't know what the hell's going on, they're hilarious. If you know what's happening, if you're reading papers and watching television, reading magazines, and you're informed, they're extremely hilarious. Nuanced, clever, all of that. So yeah, that's my response to that. Okay, experts.
I actually think it's great. I mean, look, the great thing about John and Stephen is that they do something that, this is kind of a complicated topic, but there's a lot of criticism of the media for engaging in false equivalence. That you get these people, there are a lot of people on both sides, partisans of both sides, who yell at you if you say something they disagree with, or if you try to present both sides of an issue, you get yelled at for being a liar or engaging in false equivalence, right? So, some of us try to say, look, here's what Republicans are trying to say, here's what Democrats are trying to say, let me try to be analytical about this and not be partisan in terms of how we present these things. However, there is reality in the world, right? And one of the things that the press sometimes gets criticized about is not being willing to say, this is, just in objective terms, this math doesn't add up, or this is a fact. The sun does rise in the east and set in the west. These are facts. You can't allege otherwise. And the great thing about Colbert and Stewart, beyond the fact that they're funny, is they're willing occasionally, often, almost every night, to call bullshit on that. And in fact, John's thing of, bullshit mountain when he talks about Fox News and the conservative ecosystem, it's kind of, there's the inherent thing that they're trying to do is to say, look, there's spin, and there is sometimes on the one hand, the other hand is a valid way of looking at things, but there are other times when it's right to talk about what is real and measure the statements of both parties and both ideologies against reality. And to that extent, I think, it's an incredibly valuable thing. I wouldn't want anybody to have that be their only source of news, but it also doesn't trouble me at all that it's part of a balanced news diet.
The dessert. Next question.
Good afternoon. My name is Nicole Tinson. I am a junior political science major at Dillard University, and I like to say, first and foremost, I love social media. I have 1,600 followers on Twitter. Cory Booker happens to be following me, as well as President Barack Obama, so that's pretty cool.
When he DMs you, let us know.
No, wait. President Barack Obama did direct message me on August 31st and asked me to use my followers to mobilize them to vote for him.
And to send him a $5 check.
$3.
Would you please let Nicole ask her question?
Having looked at your bank account, they were like, well, you can afford $2 a second.
Go on, Nicole.
Okay. It's fair to assert that we want the true essence of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. If we are considering the political aspect of social media to be the modern-day town hall, what do we as constituents need to do to not only be acknowledged, but to ensure that our 140 characters or statuses are being used to make new policies or reform?
That is not a true-false question.
No, but it was a question very forcefully delivered. Katie.
That's absolutely,
I think-
and very grammatical, too.
Yes. Yeah. One of the things that I'm really excited for the 2013 Congress, and particularly working with some of the House Republicans, is folks like Eric Cantor, Kevin McCarthy are very committed to using technology, and Darrell Issa, to increase civic engagement. And in fact, Congressman Cantor's office built something called Citizen Co-Sponsor, where you can log in with Facebook, you can co-sponsor legislation, just like a member of Congress will. And I can tell you this much too, members of Congress are, maybe not all of them, but a lot of them, are reading when you comment on their Facebook pages or you tweet at them, they're reading that. Their press folks are reading that. And I think it is more and more becoming a part of their thinking when they go and do legislation. So the best thing for you to do is to be engaging with them and engaging with them on their pages.
Adam?
I think the quality of the conversation in the town square is based entirely on who shows up. And I think that's true of anything in democracy. And so if you care about these things, get engaged, use the tools that are available to you to sing from the rooftops what you care about, and do it in a constructive way. We talked about the polarization and partisanship. I guarantee you, there are pretty much all the cable news networks right now use social media heavily in their broadcasts, particularly MSNBC. And if you notice, largely it's the people who do have constructive comments that give the panelists on Morning Joe or whatever to something that they could talk about, as opposed to just someone saying, I hate you. And so,
Although we get a lot more of those.
Yeah.
But the ones that do get pulled up, that get a response from the member of Congress, that get used on TV and drive the conversation forward, are those that are meaningful and where you are asking a serious question saying, hey, I look at this, I look at that, and I want an answer to this. And so I'd say get involved, be constructive, and turn the conversation. And particularly if you have a good following base and so on, you have a platform. The old line from the 1980 primaries was Ronald Reagan saying, sir, I paid for this microphone. You have a microphone. You have a crowd following you that most candidates in most races in this country, if you told them, I can put 1,600 people in a room to hear you speak, would consider that an enormously successful political event. Use it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nicole. Next question.
Hi, my name is Amanda, and I'm a freshman here at Tulane. And I was wondering, with the increased integration of politics into the social media, which is a medium kind of largely used by younger voters, do you think that's going to increase the number of younger voters voting in the future and increase the civic engagement in that group, which is largely lagging behind every other group?
What do you, Adam?
I'll say right off the bat, I think it's too soon to say whether or not it's causation or correlation, but if you look at the last 2 cycles, young voters are getting back into the process in a way they didn't before. And part of that is, the Obama campaign and so on, but a big part of it is social media. There were a lot of pundits who had expected a drop-off in the youth vote in 2012 coming out of 2008. That didn't happen. There have been studies, Pew did one, that someone who is active on Twitter or Facebook is 50% more likely than the general population to show up at a political meeting or rally. They are more likely to try to influence a friend or family member's vote. So you do have sort of this Venn diagram, if you will, of younger people using social media users generally tending to be more involved in the political process, and this result of more young voters being seen in the political process. So while you can't really say, well, this exact percentage got moved by this lever, I think there's enough of an overlap there to say something's going on.
Thank you.
But Margaret, I think it's, some people have wondered which comes first, the chicken or the egg. In this case, I think it's the millennial generation came first. Right? What happened is the millennials came of age. They voted in 2004 by a lot more for Democrats than Republicans, 9 points. Then they voted in 2008 by 34 points for President Obama, 32 points for President Obama, and then again 23 points for President Obama again. What's happened is, they're voting, about half of them are voting, which is basically proportionate to the rest of the electorate. This is a generation that is socially engaged. Twitter, iTunes, texting, and tattoos are some of the characteristic features of this generation. And so they're using social media, and then they're expressing it in their politics.
The other thing that will happen, that is happening, the other thing that's just happening is that social media will not be social media soon. It'll just be media.
Yeah.
And there was a time when the telephone was a new thing, and then it became a utility. Television became a utility. These guys are building platforms that are going to be global utilities, and so there won't be things that young people use. Social media will not be a young people thing. Young people will get older. These media will get more ubiquitous, and you'll get to the point where there will be new media that we haven't imagined yet. And so as the thing just gets messy as these things get more popular and more become more part of the wallpaper. You lose that generational pull because the next generation of young kids, I know it's hard for you to imagine anybody younger than you, but 10 years from now, 10 years from now, there's going to be some kids who are going to be inventing the successors to Facebook and Twitter, and those will be the new things, and the question will be what the moment in the media, how they meet.
Margaret? And that's to your point too. The millennials invented this medium, right? Who invented Facebook? Mark Zuckerberg in his Harvard dorm. They invented the medium that has created and really influenced our politics in this way, so that we're talking about it here on this stage.
I was just going to say, Katie and I, to John's point, talk a lot about how when we work with members of Congress, with campaigns, things like that, our point of contact is almost always the new media director.
Yeah.
And we sometimes joke about, it's been 20 years since the web. At what point do we start seeing a decline in the number of new media directors because it's now a responsibility of the communications director, the chief of staff, and the legislative director again. And we've probably seen the peak in that title.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Amanda. Next question.
Hi, my name is Hope Barnard. I just graduated from Tulane this past May, and my question is aimed more toward the women, especially to Margaret Hoover. I saw you first I discovered who you were this time last year at the last summit, and I've been very fascinated by you and by Ms. McCain, particularly on that economically conservative, socially more liberal front without really crossing the line into libertarianism. And I'm curious how these, how Twitter particularly, and these small quotes and small stories, not coincidentally, but coming from that, have affected this particular presidential campaign, specifically in regards to the rape comments that have become hashtags that trend and all that stuff. How do you guys, especially as women and members of the party, address and confront those issues? Or do you think that that's going to soon become another step in the gay marriage? Maybe that should be an okay, maybe we should lay off of that, Republicans. Do you think that maybe abortion when it comes to rape and all that stuff might be something, how do you guys address all that stuff? Because it's become such a huge issue with this election.
Well, and social media has given us another place to talk about it and to interact. But I mean, I don't think, I can't speak for Megan, but I'm pretty sure I know how she feels about this. Look, I actually don't think anybody on the Republican side of the aisle really identified with the comments that Todd Aiken made or Richard Murdoch made. And one of the things that there are a group of us, we're sort of a young group, we're a newer group of people on the Republican side. Did I say something?
I'm trying to figure it out. Go on, because we're running out of time.
They are trying to have in the Republican platform language that is accept and respect, that we accept and respect that there are multiple views on this complex social issue. And if the party were to move more in that direction, I think it would be more inclusive, especially to your generation.
Do you think that Twitter and these new social media platforms have had an effect on making comments like this much more of a big deal than they might have been in previous elections?
Oh, I see.
They amplify.
I think they contribute to the cacophony, for sure.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Hope. And thank you, Katie and John and Margaret and Adam and John for being a part of this panel. The big double doors are wide open. That's my cue that we are done. So thank you all very much for sitting and watching.